pretty.
You can restart. Well, you got us.
No, well, I mean these topics are pertinent to.
Are they pertinent to the phone?
Yeah.
Excellent.
So I'm gonna say. What's up? You remember your last name?
Bob Baranowski's my name.
Baranowski.
Yeah, B-A-R-A-N-O-W.
Right. Yeah, I remember Bob Baranowski.
Yeah, I got an email from you, so I'm on somebody's list.
Yeah, no, you are. I saw you in I saw you in the forums. You wrote in the Chicago group.
Yeah.
That you would come to this. Yeah. So I saw that. I just couldn't remember what your last name was.
Yeah, you had asked people to say whether they were.
Cool. So I'm gonna get started.
Okay.
Hi everyone. I'm Max McKenna. I'm here with Bob Baranowski and Matt Corey. We are in the Harold Washington Library in Chicago. It's snowing outside. We're going to be talking today about Charles Bernstein's Pompeii, published in summer of 2008 Poetry Magazine. So I'm going to go ahead and read it, and then we'll get into it. Nobody has seen this poem before. Pompeii. The rich men, they know about suffering that comes from natural things. The fate that rich men say they can't control, the swell of the tides, the erosion of polar caps, and the eruption of a terrible greed among those who cease to be content with what they lack. When faced with wealth, they are too ignorant to understand. Such wealth is the price of progress. The fishmonger sees the dread on the faces of the trout and mackerel laid out at the market stall in quickly melting ice. In Pompeii, the lava flowed and buried the people so poems such as this could be born. So let's get into it.
Okay.
Anything that stands out immediately?
Yeah, certainly the beginning reminds you of that poem by Auden, about suffering. They were never wrong, the old masters. So this is the rich men. They know about suffering.
Right.
So that Auden poem about the painting of the boy. Who said the boy who flies up too close to the sun and gets burned?
Icarus.
Icarus.
Yeah.
It's a painting by Bruegel of Icarus.
Right.
And he's describing that poem. So,
Right.
and that's the Auden poem about suffering. They were never wrong, the old masters. So when you see they know about suffering, the rich men, it certainly brings, to my mind anyway, right away that Auden poem.
So working with that, is there an Icarus
I think so, yeah. I think there's
figure in here?
Yeah, the rich men.
Yeah.
And taking all of us too close to the sun with their greed and
Right. Very good, yeah.
the rich men.
These were both there too ignorant to understand. So who are these rich men though? What's is he talking about somebody in particular, a particular group of rich men, just rich people in general?
Well, I think it's the rich men who, now for lack of a better term, the non-compassionate rich men. The rich men who think that they're rich because they deserve to be rich. I mean, because when he finally comes up to the word greed, the greed is not the greed of the rich men, but it's the greed of those who aren't content with not being rich. So those are the people that the rich men think are the problem.
Yes.
There's a nice contrast there between. You would think if you're going to call somebody, or if you're going to tell somebody they have a problem because of greed, it's going to be the rich man, right? But
no, that's a very good observation. It's the point of view of the rich men looking down at those who cease to be content with what they lack. When faced with wealth, they are too ignorant to understand. It's very condescending.
Terrible greed, yeah.
And he calls this, Bernstein says that this is one of the natural ways of suffering that the rich men say they can't control. One of these things that seem to fall outside of their control, like, it would seem like climate change, right? The swell of the tides, the erosion of polar ice caps, and the eruption of a terrible greed. So I don't know. There's this mass of have-nots who are almost menacing to the rich men. So they keep them at an arm's length. They're too ignorant to understand the wealth that the rich men control.
I'm having a problem with the line, that begins, or the sentence that begins with the fishmonger.
Yes.
I don't know exactly how that fits into this, what we've been talking about with rich and poor being ignorant and greedy. It seems like he's saying that, these poor, so the people who aren't rich, who have this terrible greed, they're kind of people who live in glass houses, kind of throwing bricks or, pot calling, kettle black. Because what about the fishmonger? He's living off this dread of the faces of the trout and the mackerel. To me, I'm not sure how all these ideas fit together.
Well, do we believe that the fishmonger sees the dread on the faces of the trout and mackerel laid out in the market stall and quickly melting ice? Do we believe that's something that a fishmonger or fishmongers in general notice? I mean, it's an interesting idea that the fishmonger every day is confronted with the horror of the thing he's selling, like these sort of dead fish faces. It's like, is the butcher terrified at every cow head he sees? I mean, it's an interesting. It's interesting. Like I wouldn't necessarily. I would say that the fishmonger is desensitized.
He sees the dread, but he's not doing anything about it.
Well,
He's not changing his career over the dread.
It's the price. Well, he does see it. To me, it's sort of parallel to the price of progress. I mean, if you want fish, you're going to have to put up with this situation where you got these dead mackerel. And in the middle there, where he says, such wealth is the price of progress, I mean, you might be unhappy about the fact that there are people who are so wealthy when other people aren't, but that's just the price of progress. You just don't understand, kind of like trickle down economics. You need to have these rich people. You just don't understand that that's the way it's got to be. That's the price we pay for living in the society we live in.
That's a very good observation. I'm glad that you're kind of triangulating us back to that middle line. Such wealth is the price of progress. It's do either of you notice how that fits informally with the poem? That line, such wealth is the price of progress. Is there anything that's...
Well, it's a sonnet, so that's the turn.
That's the turn, yeah. It's such a great turn, I think, because those first 8 lines are one long sentence. This almost you almost trip over yourself as you're reading it. So many embedded clauses, and then you have such wealth is the price of progress, this great turn. And then these two images back to back that are, they're, you know, if this is a proper sonnet, those two images are supporting the turn. They're elaborating on the turn. I'm not sure how. Such wealth is the price of progress. I like your reading about that. It's that, you know, our modern world is you know, it's all about it's all about sort of new amounts of wealth, and it's predicated on something that being lost or changed, right? That we need to, you know, as you said, you can't have fish without a fishmonger who every day looks at the dread, and so somebody has to be willing to look at the dread on the faces of the mackerel, right? If you're going to have fish, without having to go out and fish it yourself. And that has something to do with the rich man. Knowing Charles Bernstein's, let's say his political proclivities, I don't imagine this is, you know, there's something satirical going on with the rich man. I don't imagine he's celebrating. It's something critical happening, but I'm not sure what.
But they're somehow responsible for this poem, though. I mean, the rich man, you know, seems to me as if, you know, it says in Pompeii, the lava flowed and buried the people so that poems like this could be born. But I think it's also reflecting back to the rich men and the world that they created that allowed this poem to be as well.
I don't know. I mean, I suppose I have to really think about what he means by that last sentence. How is it that the people being buried by the lava facilitated this poem?
Well, if it never happened, there'd be no reason to write about Pompeii.
But this
would have never
been
been.
about Pompeii, is it?
Well,
until you get to that,
It's not
if you didn't know the title of the poem, until you got to that last sentence, you would have no idea that he's talking about Pompeii or something like Pompeii.
no, I mean, there is an eruption, the eruption of a terrible greed. So there is an eruption earlier, but that doesn't mean it's necessarily about Pompeii itself. But if Pompeii hadn't occurred, it wouldn't mean what it does to any of us. If there was no volcano there, and no eruption that buried people,
It wouldn't be
part of our life. Exactly.
Part of our culture.
Part of our culture, part of our understanding.
It's, I know the street. Yeah, so of course it's not a poem about Pompeii. And the way that he invokes Pompeii in the end is curious. In Pompeii, the lava flowed and buried the people, so poems such as this could be born. Right. So we were just saying that the fact that Pompeii happened historically gives you a precedent or something, right, that you can invoke it. But there's also the rest of this language is, or the rest of this poem is invoking, at least in the beginning, similarly apocalyptic events. These natural apocalyptic events, right? The oceans rising, floods, the planet warming, the polar caps melting, the eruption of a terrible greed among those who cease to be content with what they lacked when faced with it. So then some kind of almost revolutionary impulse among people, among humanity.
Or is that just a very natural extension of all these other things? Is the greed, the eruption of a terrible greed, just a natural thing, just like the rising polar tides and the swelling polar caps?
Well, it is, yeah. I mean, it's being figured here as a natural then the relationship is between, to start to go towards the meta level, what the relationship is between the birthing of poems, or let's say writing poetry, and these the suffering that comes from natural things, or what I said a second ago is these almost cataclysmic or apocalyptic ruptures in history that seem to happen regularly.
Vesuvius at home.
Well, yes, of course. So yes, there's reference to Emily Dickinson, volcanoes being Sicily, and I imagine he's invoking that.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with that poem, Bob?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. Oh, we did it.
It was discussed in,
That's right.
Is it in plus?
one of the Monaco.
I think it might be in plus.
It's in plus.
It's in plus, yeah. So yeah, it didn't occur to me at first, but now it could be a touchstone for Charles.
Yeah, I think even if you didn't know that Charles Bernstein, what his political or economic or social ideas were, it's clearly a satirical thing. I mean, the Richmond, hey, it's like Donald Trump when they were interviewing him during the campaign, where he said, "Well, I've suffered. Because they were talking about him criticizing his family who lost a son in the war, and how could he do that since I've suffered too. It's almost that kind of statement, I think. Richmond, no, they don't.
Right, they don't.
I don't know if it's satirical. I guess it's a critique of capitalism. It's a critique of capitalism, but I don't know if satirical is a word I would use.
Well, when you say the Richmond know about suffering, I mean, how would you? I mean, do you think he really thinks the Richmond know about suffering?
Well, he says they know about suffering that comes from natural things.
And he includes as one of the natural things the greed of the ignorant poor.
Yes. And I think there it is. It definitely is critical of the rich. I think you're right. I would agree with you that there's this. Oh, I know of your natural suffering and what happens when you don't have anything and getting mad. That is a kind of very condescending approach or a condescending attitude that say a rich man would have, right, towards people who were not as well fortunate. It's a tough one.
It's very good.
It's very, very good.
It's an excellent sonnet.
It's really cool. Anybody notice the date?
Let's see, 2008. So that would be Obama coming in.
Yeah, it's
Right around
gearing
there.
up for Obama. We're also gearing up for the crash, the Great
Well, it's
Recession.
June of 2008 before the bottom actually fell out, right?
Yeah, it's
I
before.
mean, I think that was
Mm-hmm.
kind of like right before the crash in 1929. It was the roaring 20s. Everybody,
Yeah,
everything was great, and then all of a sudden,
it's prescient in that respect. It is published shortly before the bottoming out, which was in September or something. So yeah, I don't know. He's sensing something happening. Around capitalism, around these sort of cyclic cataclysms that disrupt it once in a while.
So such wealth is the price of progress. Is that a flat statement by the poet, you think, Bernstein, or is it satire?
I think it's satire.
yeah, it's the rich men saying, listen, you poor people who are envious, and you're the ones who are greedy and you're the ones who don't understand. I mean, this wealth that we have it's the price of progress. I mean, that's sort of just classic capitalism, I guess. You know, take care of it. And if you didn't have rich people, then, you know, you wouldn't have capital to invest, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You know? So it's just the price of progress. You just don't understand.
But eventually, this poem comes out of it. You know, and that's why I'm wondering if it's really satire as much as just a simple fact. He's just stating a fact. This wealth is the price, and I say he, the poet, stating this wealth is the price of progress, and art will come out of it.
That's a slightly more optimistic reading than I would have, but I see where you're coming from, Matt. And that's part of the brilliance of this poem, I think, is the ambiguity in that term, right? Like, you know, as you were right to point out, or were you right to ask, is this the poet Charles Bernstein stating this flatly as fact, or what level of irony is at work here? Is it,
or is it the rich people?
Is it the rich men
speaking that?
Or is it this ironized? Is it this ironized Bernstein who's just saying, oh well, such wealth is, you know, almost giving voice to these things, or it's hard to say.
But at the end, we do have this work. You know,
right.
This poem is born out of all of that.
The suffering that comes from natural things.
Yeah.
That's exactly it. The suffering.
So this is the price of progress. So
I'm still having a hard time just plain understanding that last sentence. How is it that the people being buried by the lava in Pompeii allowed poems such as this to be born? He could have written this poem if Pompeii never happened, couldn't he? He could have written this poem about wealth and wealthy people and how they criticize poor people. He could have written all that without Pompeii having occurred, no?
But he couldn't write it without the wealth inequality, right?
Sure.
The bad part, you know, this negative thing.
Why not?
Because that's what it's about.
I mean, Charles Dickens, anybody, there's been all sorts of literature written about, you know, wealth and poverty and how the poor the wealthy think they understand the poor, but they don't, and criticize the poor because they don't understand that we really need to be wealthy, and all sorts of stuff like that to have nothing.
So what would you say if you were to speculate? What would you say is the reason that Bernstein calls the poem Pompeii and makes this reference?
Well, I think when you pick this poem up and you see the title is Pompeii, you're expecting something cataclysmic. You're expecting death and destruction. You know, and that's the mind, at least for me, that's the mindset that you go into this poem. So when you start talking about wealthy people and how they criticize the poor, and so you're to me, I'm waiting for something to happen to these wealthy people. I'm waiting for something to occur, and I don't know exactly how the Pompeii fits in, except that it sets a mood. It sets an anticipation. An anticipation in me for something cataclysmic, something bad.
That's very good. I think waiting for something to occur, this anticipation, that's also what the poem is doing and what Bernstein is doing. I would suggest. that he's describing this system and situation of great inequality, and talking about these eruptions, these that happen within that. And it seems like he's almost waiting for what would be the modern Pompeii. He wants to see it as almost this revolutionary economic.
When he says to me, in reflecting on it now, it's sort of like the very beginning of the very first words of the poem. The wealthy know about, rich men know about suffering, and the feeling is, to me, is they don't, but they will.
Right.
All these people who thought they had it made in Pompeii, maybe that's, that thinking about that event, Pompeii. Again, I'm trying to read his mind, I suppose. Maybe that's what triggered, to some sense, Bernstein to write this. So maybe that's the understanding for me, or a possible understanding of that last sentence. That I would have not written this poem the way I wrote it if it wasn't for Pompeii. Maybe that's what he's saying to us.
Well, when I think of Pompeii, I think of people going today and seeing, these bodies encrusted in ash. The fear is still on their faces as they're buried by this volcano. And then, of course, it brings me back to the Auden and the poem at the Musée des Beaux-Arts, where he's talking about, Icarus falling. And he talks about what's going on in the paint bag. Nobody's even paying attention to poor Icarus. The farmer's plowing his field, and the doggy goes on with its doggy life, and
well,
nobody cares.
When you said that, about the going to Pompeii and seeing the look on, it made me think of the line in the poem about the fish.
With the fish, yeah. The dread in their fish. And
That's so good, yeah.
Because you do.